ESL inclusion class, so I had 3 different pathways happening at once. One of them is for my newcomers, and one of their objectives is different, and that's because I use their woulda can do's to create speaking, listening, reading, and writing objectives for them. And so when my students are doing higher level reading analysis, they're focusing on what their woulda can do objectives are. So that's how their pathway was a little bit modified. My higher of my ELL kids were doing a modified pathway where the text was different from the other. So like they were still doing the higher level analysis, but the text was modified for them, and I also gave them an audio of the text for my like even lower tiered in that tier. So there was kind of like 2 different modifications with that pathway. And then my third pathway was for my other students who either like needed, so the whole lesson was basically on applying a close reading strategy and really kind of taking it and running it with their own, and so it was giving them opportunities to do that. So that's what you saw.
Any questions from Ms. Ms. Frank, let me ask you, do you feel like you're doing it right?
I think I'm doing it right in the ones where I'm...
Because you're year 2.
Right. So I think last year we tried to go all PL for our Math 1, and as a result we didn't necessarily personalize it as much where we were giving enough teacher instruction mixed in with it. It was like we thought we just had to give them a playlist and go with it, and it ended up that our blend space, to an extent, housed some worksheets. And we'd flipped the year before, so we were still flipping, but our playlists per se were just exactly what we had done the year before, but instead of making copies of the worksheets, we had them on blend space and thought we were personalizing. So we're kind of we have fixed that kind of throughout this time. And then in Math 8, I think because it wasn't like we had to go all in, there's another Math 1 teacher coming, and because we didn't have to go all in, I think we're doing it a lot more purposefully and not saying like we have to personalize every single lesson, but instead personalizing when it makes sense for the unit that we're doing, if that makes sense.
Thanks for coming, Ms. Sackhoff. She's
Twining.
Twining. I'm sorry. She was like, I'm sorry. She got very good. It's beautiful. But Ms. Frank was just saying to us how I asked her was she doing it right, and so she went back and talked about how you guys had flipped before. Mm-hmm. Can you guys all speak about some of the skill sets that students need in order to be successful in PL?
One thing that we did not do all of last year that we implemented at the end was the sign-off sheet to kind of guide them what was important and what, bare minimum they needed to understand something. So that, I think, was like, it was more of a free-for-all last year, and they were just like practicing whatever, and most of them were practicing what they were good at and not getting their practice on what they actually needed to practice. So that was something that we talked about and we did towards the end of last year, and the kids really appreciated it. And we're even, like, we sign off right now, but next unit we're going to try letting them sign off, or give them the option, like, do you want me to sign for you, or do you want to sign for yourself, just to keep, like, changing what we're doing to see if it'll work better, like if they'll hold themselves accountable, and if not, then we can go back to us signing it. So that's something that we had to change.
Because I think with our sign-off sheet, one of the things that we were just talking about yesterday in planning is that some of the higher students, we have a quiz type thing that they take at the end of each section to see if they got it. Some of the higher students, I don't know if it was you or another teacher, was like, they were like, I took it, got 100 before I even did the practice, and because right now we're requiring them to practice, it's almost like they're just going through the motions and they don't need it. And so if we don't sign off or don't require it, then they might be able to make that choice of, I actually can do these lists of things.
Move on to something harder, or that they actually need to practice.
Or go to tasks that we designed last year to try and help them.
They also need to be able to, like, you have to have that trust in the classroom. Like, some of our classes, they might not be on the website that they're supposed to be on the whole time, so like talking to them about like time management and the trust being there if they want to have that free time to work and be able to listen to music and be able to kind of do it on their own, that they have to step up and realize that they're being held accountable for what they're doing, because otherwise, like, I've seen kids before like being on what they're not supposed to be on. So the trust.
Like, I've been in education for like 15 years. Being in their
classrooms, the days of the whole I'm the line leader and I'm the materials manager, they're so different. You have like the tech person at their group that actually assists to say, oh, I'm helping this person get logged in. And so it's different procedures in the classroom just with the technology, but also the habits of mind. And I know Ms. Twine, you inputted some things with habits of the mind after the training that we had. Could you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so I had, last year I did it with one class. I have 2 Math 1s this year. So there were 16 habits of mind, and I had 8 groups in one class, 8 in another, to work with the group to figure out what it was, like look up words they didn't know, figure out, because they're complex words, it's hard to get through some of it, and then present to the class in any way they felt comfortable doing, whether it was a skit or a poster, what that habit meant and why it was important to have in school, specifically at the beginning of the year. So they were able to talk about why it was important for school and their own lives, and then they eventually all did make posters, and they're displayed in the classroom just to reference and make sure that they're seeking, not just doing the bare minimum, to like be curious and explore, and then to have a good sense of humor and just different things that we talk about and reference throughout the year.
There's not one way, as you've seen in the classrooms, all of them are different, even in some of the exact content or the same resources and materials. It's always going to look different. Are there any questions?
You spoke, we're implementing in Math 1 right now, trying to do it slowly. We're trying to struggle with direct instruction versus playlists and how much of that can do on your own. So you talked about last year being a house, blend space housing the sheets. So what are you doing differently this year? We're struggling.
It's still set up the same way that we had it last year. It's just we're more purposeful kind of in what they should be doing and where the choice comes in. So again, we flipped. This is our second full year, but it's been 2.5 years of us having a flipped classroom in Math 1. So we kind of set up their playlist where they watch a video, and then while it still has a whole bunch of worksheets because that is where they get their practice from, the sign-off sheet that Ms. Whiting talked about helps kind of guide them, and they get to make choices within a worksheet, but we now are picking out, like our one for chapter 5 is really specific, where we're picking out the things that we need them to practice. What happened last year was we'd be like, oh my gosh, there was an awesome word problem in box 7, number 22, but if a kid didn't know to go to box 7, number 22, they might just be working on box 6 and never make it further. So
Are you guys still doing the instruction at the very beginning?
So there are some things, like for example, in this unit that we're in right now, arithmetic sequences, we're doing direct instruction. We don't have a video for that because we feel like the exploration of figuring out where it comes from is more helpful than just watching a video. Next unit, like scatter plots, we do more direct instruction and talking about like interpolation versus extrapolation with that, like in the class versus just watching a video. So there are certain things where we feel like there's a lot of notes and it would benefit them to have the video versus we can have a good conversation about this, so we're just going to do this traditionally, and then they can go to Blend Space to get resources, or they work in class without Blend Space. It just depends on the topic and what makes most sense.
And one of the things that I'll do in my class is if they don't have their assigned seats, and so for Math 1, based on the video the night before, if they're on the left side of the room, it means they didn't really understand the video and they want a little bit more teacher-led instruction. If they're on the right side, they're ready to practice. And so after we go over, I think we all kind of lead a discussion on what questions does everyone have from the video. We go over the lesson check, we figure out all those things. When I say, all right, everybody go practice, I will go towards that left side of the room and I either give an extra mini lesson of direct instruction on that topic, or I just kind of hang out with those students who are over there, and it varies as to how big the group is, and either work on one of the Blend Space boxes with them, or I just keep giving them examples and we work through it that way. And that way, if half the class doesn't need that direct instruction after watching our video, they're ready to go, and you're just kind of teaching to the smaller group.
And something that we did, we just had like a quarter quiz that like wrapped up the entire quarter is, and I know Miss Frank uses this a lot too, is like how to pull everywhere. And the question that I posed on that pull everywhere was like, what do you need most help with? And it showed up like a Wordle would, like a word cloud, the thing that they type most often gets the biggest. So I was able to pull mini groups from that. And I've done that a few times. I know you do it more, I think, than the rest of us, but I'm able to pull like mini groups and say, okay, now I'm working on consecutive integers because that was a big word, or now I'm working on inequalities, now I'm working on conversions. So
And
those
it's kind
small
of a rotating
yeah.
group.
Instead of like talking to the whole class about what not everybody needs, like if you need this, move forward, if not, move back.
And the students feel more comfortable telling what they don't know in the survey sometimes, so then when they pull into the group, they feel more comfortable with a smaller group that they're working through these thought processes, and it's really been reflected in their data that the students have had a very high growth data from their pre-assessments, because they use those in mathematics a lot to this point.
I know as a year one teacher, Ms. McAvoy, just switching a little bit, tell us what your planning has been like in order to prepare your resources and lesson plans, you know, for your
So
students.
this is my year one PL, my first year teaching 8th grade language arts as well. So there's kind of like a lot of new stuff that I'm doing. So the way I like to consider like the planning process is it's like, okay, so what are my objectives? How can I differentiate? And then take it a step further, how can I personalize? So it's kind of like a 3-step process for me. And I have to consider based on the objective, do I want to differentiate based on Lexile level? Do I want to differentiate based on product or the process? So it really kind of, depending on the objective, allows me to figure out how I want to differentiate. And then again there, I'm using that objective to figure out how do I then want to personalize. Do I want to personalize by creating a pathway, by giving them that, by like personalizing the pace? Do I want to personalize by giving them some choice in how they do what they do? So it really kind of all, for me, goes back to the objective. And kind of like what you said, there are some lessons where I'm like, I'm not going there. Like, I don't need to go there, depending on what it is. For the most part, in my first block, for those of you that popped in, I always have to go there since it is an ESL inclusion class, and I only get support from my co-teacher every other day. So one day I am by myself with 17 native Spanish speakers in a language arts class. So I always have to go there in that class. In my other classes, it kind of depends on my readiness and my ability, and if I think the objective kind of lends itself to go there.
And I'll be honest with you, Mr. Angerer has put in time for the teachers here to have extended planning. We haven't done it yet this year, but last year with our year two, he put forth efforts to have subs, so we had half a day or a whole day of planning so the teachers could collaboratively work and get this front loading so they could participate as facilitators during their class times with the students. Questions?
Yeah. How do you determine mastery in your content areas? I mean, I know that kids pass a test and they can pass a test and you can see a little bit of growth, but how do you as individual teachers determine that they have mastered that concept in your classes?
We use the program ProProf, and it's the little quizzes that Ms. Frank was talking about. So at the end of each section, they get kind of like a pulse check for themselves. It's not a grade that we enter in the grade book, so it's not like as scary for them. They're not as stressed about taking it, but after they do section 4-5 and they've done their blend space playlist, Ms. Frank created for this unit, we just started at like an I can, like check off sheet of what they should be able to do if they've practiced sufficiently, and then they take their ProProf and it's 5 questions on that topic, and then they track their scores. So if they got a 60, they know they need to go back and practice more of the types of problems that they missed, ideally. And then if they got 100, they know they're ready to move on to the next topic. So we, on the sign-off sheet, have a place where they record that, and if they retake it, like I allow my students, like, go back and retake it, that's fine, like, because some of them are driven and motivated and want to know the right answer and how to get it. They'll put their retake score, and we just include that as part of their score for turning in that sheet.
So it's kind of like that's for them to determine whether they've mastered it on their own part.
And we can see it, like we can go in and see if we want. So that's on a daily level, like an exit ticket almost.
And that's kind of trying to put that responsibility on them also to master it. But as far as for us,
Assessment.
I mean, we're constantly, because they're working kind of on their own, it gives us a chance to work with them in a small group, to go from I know her room is in groups when you guys were in her room, and so she can go from group to group. I can kind of go from desk to mine, move their desks all over my room, and we can kind of have those conversations. Obviously, if they take that test and they haven't mastered it, we make them go through a corrections process and then a retake. But one of the things that we have weekly assignments that we give our students, and those questions and those topics that they've been consistently missing show up on those weekly assignments, just kind of so we can keep it fresh in their minds. But our biggest way for mastery, I feel like, is their self-check through those pro-prof quizzes.
Yeah. And then knowing like who we need to pull during like a tutoring session or during lunch to work on like retests or retake and practice those problems. Like we grade, all of us grade, you know, the turnaround is really quick, and we the next day are trying to figure out how do we pull these students to work with them. So there's the daily level and then like the assessment.
In language arts class, it is so tricky. So for my students who are on grade level, mastery is mastery of grade level content, grade level reading, grade level questions. For my students whose Lexile level are lower, it's a good combination of that and have assessing them on their independent Lexile level. So that's why some of my kids had that modified pathway, because one of the tasks was their assessment. Whether they knew it or not, they read a passage and applied soapstone, which was one of the essential questions. And so those kids doing it at their independent reading level is acting as their assessment. Now, all of my kids take the same test from units, and so they always have that grade level mastery in mind, and they kind of know where they stand based off of skills for them. Now, my really low newcomers, their mastery is from their individual reading, writing, listening, and speaking objectives that I create and modify. It's so much more muddled in language arts.
I have a question about the lesson plan. Is it different for different contents? And I'm looking at the example that was over here with the misconceptions. Is that something that's in every content, or was that something that was rethought as you transition to personalized learning, or no?
No, we have our grade levels are set up using your same team format, but by the PLCs. So every week, our PLCs plan together. The PLCs were PLC leader. We have PLC leaders and we have department leaders here. Our PLC leaders collaboratively decided, like, this is what we want lesson planning to look like. And so they were given examples and they utilized their own lesson plans to create them for what's best for their content area. Those lesson plans, they don't always have to write out a full day plan, but when they do long range planning, they have a collaborative format and they utilize the Google Drive to keep everyone on the same page. So when they have their weekly plannings, they will come to the beginning of planning and speak and say, this is, you know, based on these objectives last time we did this, and then last week we want to now change this based on our data. That's when they do that during the week. So they have some sort of long range planning to put the skeletal together, and then they meet every week to put together the lesson planning format. Now, each individual teacher, depending on their year, they use their own planning procedures. Some may be beginning teachers, and they might, you know, be turning in lesson plans and meet with their mentor often. Some more veteran teachers might be utilizing just, you know, a checkbox thing that they're utilizing for their services. But at the time when the items in their PLCs, they decide these are some of the resources I can use to meet this type of student, and then I can use these sorts of resources to meet this type of student. And they share those resources, and that's what makes it most successful, because it's a lot of work to, if you put that on one teacher, say if you look at Ms. McAvoy's class, like that has, you know, those various types of
And
learners.
I was going to say, like, for the specific plan that you have, is that the Math 1?
Right, like I love the fact that it has the potential misconceptions.
So we decided, like, we let one teacher write the Math 1, and then we all edit based on our own needs. And one teacher wrote the Math 8 for this week, and then we, you know, edit it based on our own needs and how our class is going to look.
And even those are differently formatted.
Yes. So this next week, it'll be the two other teachers using the same similar types of ideas, but we're going to modify it based on what we need. So like Ms. Frank has, like, you go on the left, you go on the right. I don't do that in my classroom. I do more of like, because they're in groups, like come to the front of the room and I'll help you if you need it, or I'll pull a small group. So it looks different, but the same ideas are there, and we know,
So
like
the potential misconceptions, that's not in the language arts.
that's just your person.
That's
Yeah,
That's what we have to
yeah. We just
when
started.
they solve, and
Yeah.
we've seen, you know, what they've been doing. Like we know this is where they tend to make mistakes.
We were
so.
trying to make the lesson plans useful for us instead of kind of just jumping through the hoop of having them. And that was kind of. We also have our generic lesson plans when we do have to jump through hoops and just have them there. But this year, I think we were trying to just make them more useful to us. If we have to write them, they should be something we use, and that's where we came up with that.
And the ILT teams came together and looked at different lesson planning format, and they came to some agreement. Like at least at the bare minimum, we should have these items. So
I like the fact there was also an emphasis on the teacher role, since that's the thing that that's the challenge of PL. It's like, do you pull back? Are we doing more hands-on today?
It's really hard to do the personalized learning and then do the lesson plan because you don't really know what they are working on. Last year, trying to write one using our old format, I have no idea what I ended up writing on it because you don't know what each student is doing, and so that's kind of where it just.
I think it's easier this year that we know like where the mistakes we made were, or we're like they didn't do well on this. Like we know we can make sure to talk about it. But
And we're lucky that it's been our PLC has been the same for 4 or 5 years, and so we've done the same thing year after year, and it kind of lends itself to being like, all right, last year they messed up on this.
and then Ms. McAvoy, she's the PLC leader and knew that team, so that's different. Gauging those relationships and moving forward, personalizing language arts for the first time also.